Good evening, everyone. Warm welcome to Business Live. Coming up in this edition, new World Bank reports warns Ghana's recovery is threatened by uncertainties surrounding global economic upturn. We ask, how do we build the required shock buffers as an economy to help mitigate the impact of these developments on Ghana? We shall be discussing that. Also in this bulletin, tax analyst Francis Timoboy calls for further rollout of the 2024 tax measures passed into law in order to avoid another introduction of new taxes in the mid-year budget.
In all, if you look at the 2024 revenue measures, that alone is going to bring about 1% of GDP. Give or take, we shouldn't expect some new taxes in the mid-year budget because this is an election year.
Plus, Mine Workers Union calls for termination of mining lease given to Future Global Resources of the Bogoso Prestia mine as the group threatens to demonstrate for a week if government fails to heed to their demands.
We embark on a series of actions including demonstrations, and we intend to do so at the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources and also at the Jubilee House.
We have details of these and many others lined up for you. Please stay. Thanks so much for your company. I am Pius Kojo Baka. We can now zoom into our very first story. The country's economic recovery is likely to be affected by uncertainties surrounding rebound of the global economy. This was captured in the latest Africa Pulse report released by the World Bank today. George Yafe tells us more.
The report noted that the recovery that we are seeing in Ghana and other African countries can still be classified as fragile. This because it is dependent on things improving in those developed countries that have heavily supported Ghana over the years and are now facing some challenges. It is for this reason that the World Bank is worried about how these developments could impact badly on Ghana going forward. The Africa Pulse report revealed that contribution of the global economy to Ghana's growth in other African countries will remain modest. The bank was, however, quick to add that monetary policy rate cuts in the global economy may go a long way to aid investments into Ghana and other African countries from next year. The World Bank also revealed that growth that we are seeing in the country is fueled by private sector consumption. It, however, maintained that further cuts in the policy rate are still needed to bring inflation rate to appreciable levels in the country. The bank also raised concerns about how growth supported by the private sector could be hampered because of the depletion of stock of excess savings accrued during the COVID-19 pandemic. The World Bank in the report added that maybe the time has come for Ghana and other African countries to look at financing their own development rather than depending on external donors. It has resulted in these huge debts that are threatening the stability of Ghana.
So let's bring in economist Dr. Edu Owusu-Sarkodie for some analysis on this warning. Thanks so much, sir, for your time here on Business Live, and good to see you. What do you make of this warning by the World Bank that Ghana's recovery is dependent on happenings in other developed economies?
Yeah, we know we are in a global village where countries depend on one another. And I think if you also listen to the Bank of Ghana during their MPC press, the governor indicated that the developments in the global economy are posing so much uncertainties. And he cited the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. He also cited the Russia-Ukraine war, which is disrupting supply chains and is causing some uncertainties in the development of many economies, like emerging economies like Ghana. And that is why they also even kept their MPC rate at 29%. It's one of the reasons, of course, the other reasons that they cited. So clearly you will see how developments in the global economy affects individual economies because of the globalization. You live in a global village. I take you back to 2022 when the US Fed increased their interest rates. You realize that most of the investors that had come to Ghana to buy government of Ghana bonds removed their funds, what you call the capital flight, because they wanted to invest in the US economy. And that caused a massive depreciation of our currency, which also fueled inflation in Ghana. So every development in the developed nations affects us. We can also talk about the global financial architecture, financing of development. We used to receive loans on concessional terms. They are no longer forthcoming. Ghana is shut to the international capital market. And so all these things are really affecting us, causing uncertainties, disrupting supply chains, causing import prices, exchange rate depreciation, high inflation. And these are serious issues that should be discussed. And my concern here should really be on the global financial architecture, which doesn't favor developing countries like Ghana at all.
And more on that, how do we build the required shocks absorbers as an economy to help mitigate the impact of these developments on Ghana?
Yeah, there are internal challenges. Of course, if you also read the report by the MPC and also even the Finance Ministry made a press, I think some few days after the MPC press, they talked about global economic development and also domestic economic development. So there are domestic challenges, there are internal things that we can do. In as much as we don't have control over the external happenings, we can have much control over the domestic. There are challenges with power, challenges with transport fares, challenges with storage, marketing, etc. And these are internal things that we can address. Irrigation is a major concern. Agricultural production, we have our own planting for food and jobs, which is doing great. And I think that further investments in this should be taken by government so that we can ensure ourselves with food security. And I think I told George that the other day that the fight against inflation should not be left in the hands of the MPC alone or the monetary policy members alone. The fiscal side, the real sector must also play their role. So all the internal challenges, we should find a way to address them. I've mentioned power, I've mentioned transport fares, or transportation in general, I've mentioned ownership of resources. China produces lithium, Ghana produces lithium. The difference is that China government owns 100% of their lithium. Ghana government owns less than 30% of our lithium, which when we started this year. So the difference is clear. The ownership of our resources, we must really come home. I think COVID taught us a lesson that we should look within. And I think the clarion call is still on us to look within, find solutions to our internal problems. We can leave the external problems, but the internal challenges, we cannot blame anybody, but find solutions to them.
Homegrown policies you are looking for. Now, there is also talk about the country's fiscal situation improving, but that will, of course, be dependent on reaching a deal with the external creditors. What do you make of that call?
Yes, the fiscal consolidation, of course, we know is the number one pillar of the IMF program. And government of Ghana, I must say, that has achieved more than 70% of the fiscal consolidation in the year 2023 alone. So there's not much problem over there. I think the issue is that because we have not been able to raise enough revenue, government was forced to cut its expenditure. Last year, they cut the expenditure by about 20 billion Ghana cedis. This year, even though in terms of nominal figure, they're not cutting expenditure, but as a ratio of GDP, they have cut the expenditure by 6 percentage points. And therefore, there's every reason for us to raise enough revenue. If not, the government will be forced to sacrifice expenditure. So there are a number of revenue measures that they have put in place. The first thing people normally talk about is the tax revenue. A number of tax handles have been introduced. My issue here is that we should make the tax administration more efficient, make the tax very simple. I think GUTA and AGI, they have complained a lot about how complicated our tax system has been. Even in the definition of the tax, the AG has a different interpretation of one tax. The same tax is being interpreted differently by AGI and GUTA. The same tax is being interpreted differently by the tax collectors. So you see how complicated things have been in the tax administration. And so the onus is on us for us to simplify our tax system. Is the reason some of us support the flat tax rate a lot, which has been proposed by Dr. Baumia. And so let's come home. The tax revenue may not be the only, of course, the major component of revenue, but it may not be only the only source of revenue to government. I've always mentioned about the extractive sector. The extractive sector has been projected to grow 12% if you're looking for tax revenue or you're looking for revenue, a place to tax, you only look at the area of your economy which is growing, i.e. the extractive sector, telecommunication sector, and the rest. So these are the sectors that the government should look at, and then maybe find a way of raising more revenue from the extractive sector and from the telecommunication sector. Make sure that we meet the target going forward.
And I want us to talk about the second IMF program currently underway. And we know that one thing that has come up as a result of that review has to do with our revenue mobilization gap occasioned by suspending some taxes in the 2024 budget. But the question here is that, do you think that the success of this program depends heavily on revenue mobilization?
The success of the program is about fiscal consolidation. The fiscal consolidation is also about narrowing the gap between revenue and expenditure. And so there are two ways of narrowing the gap between revenue and expenditure. Either you raise revenue or you reduce expenditure. I am not a student of tax expenditure reduction. I'm just more on efficient, because already the money is not enough. Look at the budget. Only 3 items consume the entire revenue and grants. And so there's not even any place to cut again. But I preach, efficient management of our revenue, but the whole idea is to be able to narrow the gap between revenue and expenditure, and I think that government is on course. I've already indicated that they have achieved 70% of that only in the year 2023 alone. And so going forward, we must look at the areas that we can raise more revenue, look at areas that we can ensure expenditure management, so that we are able to keep the gap between revenue and expenditure narrowed. We are back to the 5% fiscal deficit of GDP as a percent of GDP. We are back to that Fiscal Responsibility Act. I'm not sure government will go beyond that. Currently, the BOG is practicing 0% financing. So in other words, if Ghana government needs revenue, they cannot turn their attention to the Bank of Ghana because they will not mind them. We are only calling for a support because the fiscal burden, the greater part of it has to do with the interest payment, domestic interest payment and external interest payment. Government has successfully, about 80% successfully conducted the domestic debt exchange, which has made some savings. It is projected that government will make about 50 billion cedi savings. And then if successful, they are also likely to make about $10 billion savings in the external debt exchange. So we are all waiting on the Paris Club in China and all other external creditors to help Ghana restructure our debt, to give us some relief, to provide some savings. And when successful, and I'm sure when successful, the financial burden on the government of Ghana will be lighter and the program will continue to be on course. I think what we are all looking for, we are all waiting for, is a translation of all this recovery of all these numbers into sustainable growth and then also job creation in the future. For now, we all know why our GDP growth has been sacrificed, because if a country goes through tight fiscal policy, tight monetary policy, domestic debt exchange, the result is simple. You are sacrificing your GDP. And so I'm not surprised at all that our GDP growth has been slowed. But there is hope. There is hope that...
All right. Talking about hope, in a minute, if you could do that for me, I really appreciate that. And looking at the challenges facing the economy, can we raise the required revenue by the end of 2024 in a minute?
We can, and we should. We have no option than to raise the required revenue for 2024. The first quarter revenue projections have been positive, according to World Bank and according to the Bank of Ghana and according to the Ministry of Finance. If you look at their fiscal tables, I think the performance has been great. So the deviation hasn't been that much. So yes, the government is on course in terms of mobilizing its revenue. We don't have to just relax and throw our hands in despair. We have to make sure that as a country, we mobilize the resources that require. The tax administration must be simple and efficient, as I've indicated. And these are ways that we can keep our revenues growing. We need to mobilize it. Every lesson we have learned from COVID to the disruptions in the Middle East and Russia-Ukraine war, everything is pointing to domestic revenue mobilization. And we should ensure domestic revenue mobilization.
Thank you so much for your comprehensive analysis here on Business Live, Dr. Edu Owusu-Sarkodie. A while longer with the economy and tax analyst Francis Timobo is calling for the full rollout of the 2024 tax measures passed into law. His call is coming at a time the International Monetary Fund expressed concern about how the government is going to address the revenue gap due to the suspension of some taxes in the 2024 budget, including the value-added tax on electricity. Speaking to Joy Business, Mr. Timobo urged government to be more proactive, hence will be therefore or might be compelled to introduce new taxes in the media budget.
The IMF is in town to check on the expenditure control, which is something that we always allow to slip through. So it's a good thing that we're able to check us to ensure that we spend within our means. That is also good. I'm also expecting the GRA to also roll out the full implementation of the taxes that were passed. The emission has not been done. We're also expecting the expansion of the communication service tax. In all, if you look at the 2024 revenue measures, that alone is going to bring about 1% of GDP. Give or take, we shouldn't expect some new taxes in the mid-year budget because this is an election year and business is already crying. But if by mid-year we are not getting anywhere near, possibly the new Minister of Finance may attempt to introduce some new taxes. And a typical area that they can look at is maybe the natural resources. Maybe they will want to, go and revise the royalty rate and all those taxes that are paid in the natural resource sector, especially because many countries are now arguing that, look, people are arguing for a sustainable environment, and therefore, if you have natural resources like oil and gas, you should tax them heavier than now. So we should expect something in the mid-year budget. I think political parties should be measured in their promises and their expectations so that we don't promise what we can't deliver. And again, we expect the GRA compliance measures to be more enhanced, and so businesses should be prepared. We shouldn't introduce new taxes at this moment, especially if it is in the form of indirect taxes. Rather, let's focus on the compliance measure, the existing one. It's easier enforcing the existing taxes rather than bringing new taxes. So if we're able to enforce the new one, the existing ones, and I think that we should be able to achieve the needed revenue that we need as projected in the budget.
And to some other stories, Samsure IQ's brand and performance index for 2024 has revealed that Ghanaian consumers were progressively spending more of their hard-earned income on food and alcoholic beverages than the non-alcoholic beverages and, of course, non-food products. This was attributed to rising inflation, thereby shifting consumer behavior and spending patterns. Let's go on Zoom and speak to the founder of the CEO of Samsure IQ, Dr. Erasmus Labi Owusu, for some more on that. Thanks so much, sir, for your time. How is inflation affecting Ghanaian spending, basically, from your research?
Well, thank you for inviting me to this program. Well, based on our research, what we've identified is Ghanaians are spending more on food items, basically things that will make them sustenance, things that will keep them going, rather than things that they can probably get rid of today and then probably postpone the consumption to future times.
And what types of everyday items are you talking about?
Well, when we talk about everyday items, we're talking about food items. For instance, we're talking about rice, we're talking about tomato mix or tomato paste, as you may call it. We talk about food seasoning. We are talking about, if we talk about, let's say, the beverages, we're talking about soft beverages, CSD, carbonated soft drinks. We're talking about malted soft drinks and the others.
And how much has spending on food and non-alcoholic drinks increased in Ghana, you would say?
Well, okay, so we looked at the proportions, and based on the proportions, we identified that, for instance, food item has increased by about 1 percentage points compared to last year, which will suggest that if you convert that one into, let's say, Ghana cedis, we're looking at about maybe 400 million Ghana cedis in terms of cedis.
I see. What categories of consumer goods have seen a decrease in spending from your research?
So in our research, we identified spirit or liquor, categories and also non-food categories like body cream, toilet soap, etc.
All right, so ultimately, how has inflation impacted the standard of living in Ghana?
Well, okay, so that is a supposition. We have not done analysis to check what is the impact of inflation, but what we have done is that we've identified a shift in consumption and behavior patterns. So if you have a basket or your disposable income, we have found out that people are not consuming, let's say, alcoholic drinks, or they are not buying a lot of, let's say, body creams or toilet soap, but they are focusing their hard-earned income or the limited resources they have on food items which will sustain them for life.
Dr. Erasmus Labiowusu, thanks so much for your time. CEO of Samsure IQ, speaking to us on the back of their research on consumer spending. This is still Business Life. We've got more for you after this break. Hello, welcome back to Business Life. The National Petroleum Authority is rejecting claims of regulatory failure by the African Center for Energy Policy, ACEP. It follows plans to introduce benchmark for pricing of petroleum products from April 16, which ACEP has described as misplaced priority, looking at the current challenges facing the sector. But the National Petroleum Authority, in a statement issued today, said ACEP's argument is due to lack of understanding of developments in the industry. And there you go with the statement. The NPA argued that under the new price floor for petroleum products, the various players will still be entitled to set their margins. It therefore maintained that the new guideline will not in any way stifle competition in the sector and pricing of petroleum products. You can get more of that statement on myjoyonline.com/business. Finally, before we go, the Ghana Mine Workers Union has threatened to embark on a one-week demonstration beginning 15 to 21st April 2024 at the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources and the Flagstaff House if government fails to terminate the mining lease of future global resources of the Bogoso Prestea mine. According to the union, the stalled mining firm has affected the economic livelihoods of over 1,000 direct and indirect workers due to lack of funds to keep the firm running. They are therefore asking government to quickly intervene by looking for new investors to help revamp the once vibrant mine. Addressing the media, General Manager of the union, Abdul Mumen Bana, said they would serve notice the police and other stakeholders on their intended action.
And so the minister must ensure that the mining lease is terminated or cancelled in accordance with law so that prospective investors can be brought in as soon as possible. The livelihoods, like I said, of our members are in a state of a limbo now. As I speak to you, children cannot go to school because incomes have been truncated. They cannot pay school fees. Even medical bills are becoming an issue for our members. And for that matter, this is an issue that requires immediate agency. It's a matter that must be prioritized by the government, and in this case, the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources, to ensure that the Bogoso Prestea mine resumes work with immediate effect. And so the union is demanding the minister to do the needful with immediate effect. The union is also proceeding to serve notice in accordance with Article 21, 1D of the Constitution of the Republic of Ghana, to embark on a series of actions, including demonstrations. And we intend to do so at the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources and also at the Jubilee House. We shall embark on demonstrations at the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, and it's not just going to be a day's demonstration. We're going to embark on a series of demonstrations that will last 72 hours at the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. We shall proceed to demonstrate at the Jubilee House, the seat of the presidency, because we believe that public officers must act in accordance with the requirements of law. The citizens of this republic require their attention, require their leadership. And so we will not tolerate the current posturing of the minister. He must proceed and he must act now. Yes.
And that's it for Business Live for today. I am Pius Kojo Baka. For more stories, do log on to myjoyonline.com/business. Great stories on that portal. Do visit there and get yourselves updated. See you same time tomorrow. Do enjoy the rest of our programs. Bye.